notice when we start, so don't worry, you can keep talking.
Okay, hello and welcome to the 40th Gothenburg Film Festival and Kulturarenan and the seminar program. My name is Camilla Larsson and I'm responsible for the program this year. And well, to continue the VR theme of this day, maybe all of you or some of you visited the open set upstairs, but now we will go deeper into the discussion about content and not so much technology. And I'm very proud to have all these people here, so I'm just going to leave the microphone to our moderator, Johanna Koljonen. And all this is also possible in cooperation with Boost HBG, Kultur i Väst, Region Västra Götaland, and Kultur i Halland Film.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. What a great turnout for a weekday. We're super psyched. How many of you have participated in the open set today? That's great. Not everybody. That's also good. We're not going to assume that you have. But it's fascinating to see this kind of surge of interest in VR right now. Just to be curious, how many of you has any kind of VR headset, including a cardboard or anything like that, at home? Yeah. Not so many. So this is where we are, I think, in the development of this medium. It's very exciting, but it's a little bit difficult to access at this point. Today we're going to discuss this topic, time to talk more about content and less about technology. Is it time? I'm going to introduce you all in a moment, but let's just do a yes-no vote. Is it time to speak more about content and less about technology? Who votes yes? Yes. Panels, 3.5. If I get to vote 4.5, I'm fine. All right, thank you. The questions we're going to try and touch on in the next 40 minutes or so are the following. What is a good VR piece? Is VR suited for a specific type of content or a specific type perhaps of filmmaker? Maybe we shouldn't even call them filmmakers, we can talk about that as well. And is it a medium for the classic auteur who likes, we think, with our prejudice in this program, control? Because suddenly it's the creativity, or at least somehow the interpretation of the user or the audience is forced into the spotlight. And with us to discuss this topic are the following geniuses. Peter Pontikis is a director and writer. He's a VR piece, Oh Dear, you may have already tried, or at least seen outside. It's the one that involves the deer's head. Welcome.
Thank you.
Katie Newton is a VR and AR experience designer, and also experience producer, and also a design researcher, as well as a journalist.
Thank you.
Annika Gustafsson is also a director and a producer and an interactive storyteller. But for the last 4 years, she's been running the Boost HBG program, which is a public fund and an incubator with a big focus on VR for over 2 years already. And now Annika is moving back into creative work. Welcome. And Bjarke Pedersen is the creative director of the Participation Design Agency, where he designs participation and games for analog spaces, such as museums, and also for digital platforms as well.
Thank you.
Okay. I would ask each of you to begin with describing your relationship with VR briefly. Peter, why don't you start?
Well, my relationship is quite short. Last year I did this VR project called Oh Dear, and it was it came about because I was contacted by a VR company to do something with them because they needed a director, and basically they needed ideas, I think, to fill their technology with. And at the same time, the Film Institute announced that they're doing a horror film initiative where they, during 2016, should produce 5 short films, no more than 5 minutes. So we applied to that initiative as a VR project with the ODR and got the opportunity to make it. So that's
Okay.
My background was in film and journalism, and I came into journalism when they started to need moving pictures for the web, and so I got into interaction design. And the newspaper industry in the US is kind of crazy, and I really got interested in the audience. I had to make a shift when I went from film to interaction design because the audience had a mouse to play with, so I had to think about them a little bit more. And I got really excited about it, and I ended up working at a design firm called IDEO, which is an international design firm that looks at human-centered design. But we mostly were doing product and service. It wasn't very much communication-based. And I happened to go to Tribeca one year, and I saw one of the early VR projects from the UN, and I was so thrilled by the technology, like being able to see video 360, but the experience kind of ended right there. I remember at one point in the story, a little girl comes up to you and she's talking to you, and I guess she's like the character that guides you in. And I completely ignored her because I was like looking at the other side of the room, and then I felt lost. But I knew, I loved the intention that the creators were trying to achieve, and I felt like my background in experience design, I had the tools to help sort of develop that vocabulary so that they could be more intuitive in terms of thinking about the audience. And so last year I got a grant from Stanford to explore a little bit about our understanding of what happens when you drop an audience into a story and how do they interpret a story. So that's been the question I've been pushing on ever since. It's just so fascinating. So yes, Tanya.
Well, for me, it's like I've come from a filmmaking, director, producer background, and then into interactive media, transmedia, and kind of always been wanting to do more deeper. I want to live inside a movie. I love film so much, but the rectangle is not enough. So for me, VR was like I can finally be inside, and I can't explain that feeling to be there when it really works, and I don't want to leave it ever again. So for me, I had a great benefit of running Boost, and we're like a fund and incubator with a focus of innovation and storytelling and new technology, which means that we have very free hands to running things. We ran like the first VR lab in 2014, and it's building from then, starting screening VR in Sweden and doing hackathons and stuff. And it's been a lot about kind of figuring out the storytelling mechanics in VR. Here we have a whole new medium. We take what we know from film and we try to fit it in, but it's like really this, the square does not fit in the circle. It's literally that in VR. So it's very interesting exploring that. How do we move in the space? How do we perceive it? What works? What doesn't work? The more you manage to make the experience real, and the more you feel you're in it, the easier it is that you get kicked out of it when you as a creator make a mistake where you don't perceive it as real. So I'm very interested in space and where we just forget about ourselves and we're inside a piece, whether we're there as a first person or just a spectator. And also when it comes to like new storytelling, this is revolutionizing what it's going to do in all aspects of the world. I mean, medicine, warfare, and so on. Everywhere you can use VR to learn, and explore, and share. But I'm also looking at the history of storytelling and who's been telling the stories, who's been invited, who has chosen to invite other people. And I find in the VR space we're finally enough aware of that we need a little bit more diversity in our lives, maybe. And that in this space, to me personally, it's been incredibly important to invite diverse storytellers in this, and not just filmmakers, other kinds of artists, and let people feel invited in the space. And what happens when you take creators that would not normally feel invited into the space, come there, and what do they do? So this autumn we had a series of very interesting collabs based on the storytelling. And not just being like, oh, it's cool with VR, but what kind of stories can you only tell in this medium? So.
You've also, I think, all of you have learned some things along the way that I hope we can try and give some nuggets of like practically applicable knowledge as well during this conversation. Thank you, Annika. Bjarke, what's your vision?
Well, my passion for VR started in the mid-late 80s when the first time they promised that it was coming around. And of course I was immensely disappointed that it didn't happen. And then I did what I thought was the next best thing, and I turned to role-playing games, especially live-action role-playing games, where I could create these worlds that I couldn't create digitally, but I could create them in a physical space, and then I could invite people to inhabit those spaces and step into whatever world that I created or other people created that I participated in. So, and with that comes a lot of designing and thinking about how do we interact in a space, and how do we feel safe and seen and heard and know what to do. And now that the sort of second promise of VR is coming, fingers crossed, it's very, I think it's very clear to me that that toolkit that I have learned from the live action role-playing games, and I'm not necessarily talking about what many people think when we say live action role-playing games, where you think about walks and elves in the forest. It can tell any story, of course. For example, in October this year, we're going to do a 3-day, 100-person version of Shakespeare's Hamlet at Castle Elsinore in Denmark. So you come and you live at the court of Claudius for 3 days. So you can tell any story, even the greatest story ever told. So, but yeah, that toolkit can be applied. Most of it can be applied directly into the digital virtual reality, not necessarily what I'm using in the physical space.
Annika, you guys both have used Bjarke as a teacher, but he isn't a VR designer specifically. What are you looking for when you turn to somebody who's an analog story designer?
Yeah, I mean, we chose to work with Bjarke. First of all, he's brilliant. Go to the Hamlet log, it's awesome. But it's also, I mean, the idea of a space and how do you move in a space and the creators, because I mean, in one way, VR is live in a certain way, right? Because you're inside it. So I think there's a lot of stuff you can learn from the LARPing community that they have already studied. So you often say, like, if you're going to do VR, like, learn from the gamers, and there's a lot to learn from those great games, but there's something with the character-drivenness in the Nordic LARPs, and the use of space where, for example, I did a Hamlet LARP 2 years ago, right? 2 years ago. Where you want 150 players at the castle, 15 hours role-play for 2 days. And I mean, that's an incredible LARP experience, but you know what to do in the space. You have never been there before. You have your character, but somehow you know how to move in the space. There's something about how you create that allowed us as players, and we didn't know each other in characters, in a very complicated political play with lots of drama and stuff we can't talk about, and death.
It's Shakespeare.
And Shakespeare. And but how the idea of you in there, actually as a player start intuitively to know what to do, which allows you to lose yourself into the role, because the whole thing when LARPing really works is when you forget about yourself and you become a character and it all gets automated. And that is kind of what we want in VR, right? When we forget about ourselves and everything in that space is natural how we move.
And this is actually so interesting because it also ties into exactly what Katie was just talking about, that it's difficult for the viewers, often in VR, the way the pieces come out now, it's difficult for the viewers to understand what they're meant to be doing. That the piece doesn't teach you to engage with the piece. Katie, do you think that there's going to be some universal rules? Do you think that like with film, we all understand how to view a film? Or will it be more like games where every game is different and the first thing a digital game needs to do is teach you how to play it?
Well, I think that there has to be some principles set in place, and I think part of that problem is not only that the audience doesn't know what role that they're going to be taking, but I think on the part of the content creators that are coming, it's unclear to them what opportunities they have to sort of set those guardrails for the audience. Often they don't know what role the audience should take in the space, and so they just sort of say, well, I'm going to give them free will, that's what's the opportunity of this technology. But actually what happens is the audience gets in the space and they have no guidance and they're just lost. It's amazing. Well, it's actually, if you think about it, our world is quite designed, right? Like, we know coming through the doorways where you're supposed to sit, where we're supposed to sit. We have intuition about what's going to happen, and rules can get broken, but if they're broken right at the very beginning, it would kind of send things into chaos. And it doesn't mean that we couldn't exist here as a group, but it's going to set the tone in a certain way, and some people would leave. And that's the same as VR. You're in a physical space, what we call social scripts, which are these ways that we know how to behave, are not there because it's a new format. And people quickly shut down. They quickly detach themselves from the experience. So you really do need to set those guardrails for them.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that the first thing a game teaches is how to play the game. It teaches people who know how to play games to play the specific game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big difference, is that, because if you play somebody in front of a computer or a console that's never played a computer game, they don't know how to interact with a controller.
Right.
And that takes hours and hours of learning.
Yeah.
And it's the same with VR. We don't have those hours and hours of learning because, like your piece, it doesn't take that much time, and how many pieces have we actually been in? How many hours will that rack up to? Not very many.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody has that skill set yet, or very few people have.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to come in on this, Peter?
What?
Would you like to comment on this, Peter? I also have a specific question. Okay. So, but I want
No, well,
yeah.
but it's kind of interesting because I mean we're so focused on, because I'm coming from filmmaking, so we're so focused. And I mean the rules for film are very rigorous, and I mean we know how to watch it and so forth. But I think that the thing with VR is like perspective and character, basically, how you will engage the story and how you will get through the story from what perspective. And I mean, that I think it's maybe it's really not the same thing, but I think that's the problem. And for me, at least, when I think about it, when I think about ideas that I want to do, and it's always how do I get into the story and how do I get through it, and how do I get the audience with me? Can I take the audience with me through the story? If you just throw them in there, I think they're just going to be lost. But I'm sure
I think, and certainly in Hollywood in the West, like also thinking about the audience hasn't necessarily served cinema, right? Because it's mostly through focus groups and that in general, I think, watered down our cinema very much, like just giving things that people could take in easily. And I think that's a clear distinction that we need to make. And the type of communication we're talking about in terms of audiences, like we talked about this at dinner last night, is I don't give a fuck if the audience likes the piece or not. That's not what I'm trying to do. But what I'm really interested in is is the intention of the creators of the VR team, are the choices that they're making, are they hitting the audience in the way that they intended? And is the audience being able to communicate back to the director based on those choices? So creating that clear line of engagement. And so, like in terms of thinking about audience participation, certainly coming from a lot of people who are coming from film into VR on the West, it's scary to think about an audience, and they don't necessarily know how to wrap their head around the audience. They think either they get very specific or they get too broad. And I think we have the luxury that we've worked in interaction design where it's very commonplace. Again, it's more service-oriented, and I think that's the part that we have to tweak for ourselves is we're not providing a service. You know, it's not about getting in and out fast, it's actually about letting people linger and have time.
And also to some degree, I suppose, co-create. I
Yeah.
think if you're a filmmaker now, this must be a really weird conversation. Aren't they meant to be talking about storytelling? What are they talking about this person, this audience member, and what they're feeling inside the piece? Now, arguably, you could say that I think also conventional filmmaking would be served by thinking a lot more about these issues. Especially, I think, if you're making art house cinema or documentaries or something that isn't necessarily as commercial, you have to think very much about these things, I think, in the marketplace that we live in today. But putting that aside, this is it's like when we're talking about storytelling in VR, we're talking about two indivisible but completely separate things. One is there is a story and some kind of world and a visual surface and some sounds through which that world is represented and all the characters in it that aren't represented, well, all of the characters in it. And then you have this person who you drop into that room, because it's a room, that's what virtual reality means. There's some kind of space, and you drop this person inside that space, and sometimes they have a body representation inside the space, and sometimes they don't. But regardless of whether they do, they are present inside the story physically. Mm-hmm. And that's of course something that you're never grappling with film normally. And the challenge of this new medium, which is VR, it's not going to be film, it's going to be something else that is closely related to film, and it, I think, inherits many of the best sides of film, is that these two aspects have to work together. Peter, what I wanted to ask you is, you made this VR piece coming from film, and you're still a filmmaker making also ordinary features. So, what did you learn in this first VR project? What would you do differently next time?
I mean, there's a lot of things technically we would have done differently. Maybe the technology has developed a bit more. On our artistic side, I think we would have kind of been able to develop a larger story, or maybe like a more complex narrative. Now this is a very, 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 very simple story. I mean, if you haven't seen it, it's about a deer during a deer hunt, and you're already shot, so you cannot run away or anything. You're just leaving out and waiting for the hunters.
You are the deer.
Yeah, and you are the deer, so it's a very definite point of view also. But what was the question?
What did you learn? Like from
yeah.
film, what would you do differently now with this experience?
Well, I think I would have made a more complex story, like trying to do like a larger narrative, and also technically work more with like interaction. So when the audience member looks at certain places inside the space, new video streams would trigger, and you can develop the story further and different things. Then I also learned a lot about like the limitations that I basically I set up some limitations for myself in the beginning, because I didn't want to do any cuts, I didn't want to have movement and so forth. So you have to direct the audience members' attention towards the story beats through certain things that are like classic cinematic tools, like lightning, like sound, like movement. And I mean, I think a lot of filmmakers in conventional films kind of lean always towards the editing to kind of fix everything. When you don't have a chance to do it, you just have to kind of sharpen those tools. And I mean, it's like, yeah, going to the gym and working out some specific things that you can bring back to.
Jyrki, you had a metaphor about a tie. Can you explain it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's also a weird metaphor, but it's like movies are like a tie, that you tie the tie and then you adjust it at the end. So when you do the editing and so on, there's a lot of stuff you can adjust. But with VR, it's like a butterfly, and there you do the adjustment in the beginning. When you have tied it, it's very tight, but it's not going to work. So you have to do all the stuff pre-work. With VR, when in film we can fix it in post.
And there's no post.
There's no
VR. Yeah.
I realize this may be a pretty generic metaphor, but still.
Well, there's editing, but really it's just sequencing. You're just, because you can't splice up a room, right? Like you can't cut it up. So when there's editing, it's just usually going from one space to the next space, and you can use a fade if you want. You can use a cut, a sharp cut, but you just don't have those same tools in terms of guiding the audience's eye and driving sort of tempo and tension in the way that you do in film. I think you will have more of those tools. We're working on them, but
it's where you should work with the sound, because I mean people also tend to forget the importance of sound in VR and what you can do, particularly with binaural sound and how you can direct that. And it's still like not developed as it should be.
And a little bit too heavy-handed.
When you say there's no post in VR, I'm like, what about the sound?
But I think the sound, what I'm hearing is you have to think about the sound from the get-go, because it's a very different type of sound. So I was talking to some content creators, and they were working with their sound person, and intuitively the director was like, it was her first time, she was like, can you go, they were in a big airplane hangar, and the sound person had mostly worked in what I'm going to call flatties, which is cinema, and so their inclination was to get the immediate sound, and then of course you dial that up and dial that down for cinema, right? But she was like, could you go outside, there's some kids playing in the field over there, get that sound, can you get this, the hall at the end? And her sound person didn't do that, and when she got back to the editing room, they're listening to the sound, it's very flat. And then they had to go buy these fake sounds, and of course that never is good, right? So there's a sense of depth that changes too, that when you're starting to work with sound, everything is just fuller, right? There's more layers, and that could seem like a great opportunity, but there's a lot, you can overload your audience with that too. So again, you just have to make choices.
Sorry, very briefly, I didn't ask you about the good
but
yes.
that was also one of the big takeaways with this project that I did. Actually the sound, because you think obviously that the sound will direct the audience towards whatever the sound is coming from, but that's not really the case sometimes, because the brain puts together the image with the sound, and the brain usually wants some logic in what you're seeing or what you're hearing, and if you put the sound somewhere that's kind of a little bit off, and then you have a very strong visual, your brain will kind of try to make sense of everything and try to put this together, and you don't get the reaction that you want always.
Can I
No, you guys, there's so much to talk about. I want to say that this specific thing, Katie and Annika will talk about it slightly more in depth at their session that starts at 2:30 that you should absolutely stick around for. Now, Annika, super briefly, and I need to ask you about your favorite words. Annika.
I still want to talk about the sound and how do you print it.
Okay, let's talk about the words. I asked each of you, okay, so here's the thing, here's like a secret in the VR community. When we're having coffee over there, we're going to talk quite candidly about how very much of VR pieces that you can see today are quite shit. And they are. We're never going to say it on stage because everybody is still learning. Everybody in this field is still learning how to do this. So every piece that comes out is going to have some problems. That's just the way it is, because we're literally just figuring out the language. However, it means that when you're hanging out with people in VR or experiencing VR, you can be like, this is crap. Yes, it is. A lot of it is crap today, but we need to look at what did we learn from this and what did we learn from this. However, in the interest of being like constructive and forward-looking, I've asked each of you to think about a piece that you really like, and we've already spoken for half an hour, so let's do it super briefly. Let's start over here, Bjarke. Tell me about a VR piece that you like, and then explain why.
Check out Google Earth VR. It's brilliant. That's all I'm going to say about that. Another little small piece I very much love is called Go for Launch Mercury. That of course ties into one of my big nerd jobs, which is spacefaring, and you get to sit in the capsule of the Mercury missions, which was before the Apollo missions, before you went to the moon, went to space, and that's the Americans going into space and going into orbit and going back. And you sit in that cramped little capsule, and I've studied this a lot, but only when I saw the VR piece, they understand how little space there is in those capsules, even though I've been in front of those capsules.
Like you have physically seen them in a museum,
yeah.
But you understand.
I understand the
VR,
physicality of the thing, because suddenly I'm
that it's
in that seat. Yeah. And you're on top of a massive explosives, and you're going into space where you will die. But, you know, it's a very, very beautiful little thing.
And the good thing about that, of course, is that you are, because maybe you would watch this VR piece in front of a computer, and you're sitting in a chair, and the character in the piece is also sitting down, so it makes sense. Nothing wrong.
Well, you should watch Notes on Blindness out here, which I like a lot as a piece. It's also one
Notes on Blindness.
Yes. And it's also one of those pieces where it could only have been made in VR. Alanet at Paneldebatt Studios did a fantastic piece. It's an animation of a little girl with a matchsticks. And I really like how they use the space, because you stand up and it's fluid following you. So bottom line, there's a little square of the village is at the bottom of your feet. So you actually see this figures in miniature while the stories are going on around you. So it's like really using the circular square space of the VR experience. And it's also the one that I see that graphic, it follows you. So if you can bend down around a bridge and look on the other side, and you can really follow her. So that's kind of really, and it's a great little story, and it's very well done. And technology-wise, it's kind of, when people say, well, VR will never work, I'm like, I haven't seen Element. My absolute favorite piece is a very, very simple thing. It was done a couple of years ago called Strangers, and it's basically just a 360 camera interview of a Montreal musician called Patrick Watson.
Sorry, I don't understand. A 360 camera of what now?
Just a 360
yeah.
camera. So Patrick Watson is a musician, and you're in his loft studio in Montreal, so you are the camera in the middle, and he's playing piano, and he sits down, and he takes his change out of his pockets and stuff like that, and starts playing, and it has this incredible immediate experience. It's actually a piece that made me cry hysterically, because I was really there with him, and it was him and he played his piano, he stops, he smoked his cigarette, and you have this feeling of the absolute now. And what adds to the experience is that when you turn and look on the other side, his dog is lying there, and he's looking straight at you. And of course, you're looking at a weird camera in the middle of the room, right? That's why he's watching that, like, as a dog. But the way that the dog looks at you as the person experiences peace, it makes you feel that you're there. And that extreme presence in this piece and the simplicity of it. So it's just like 7 minutes with Patrick Watson practicing one of his songs on the piano, smoking cigarette.
What's the piece called?
It's called Strangers.
Strangers.
And I left my head mask completely wet. It was a disaster. I just cried so much. And there was a thing, and I can't even explain what made me cry so much, but it was just, an immediate presence.
That's a big question, by the way, now with VR cinemas. Like, how disgusting will the headsets get? You know, by
you should wipe them clean in between.
Yeah.
There are eye infections spreading in the air.
Katie, what's a piece that's really good?
So the most recent piece that I've seen that I really loved was Through You, with Satch Guttenfeld from Oculus, developed it with Lily Baldwin. Lily Baldwin's an amazing choreographer, dancer. This is her first co-directing piece, and it's the first time that I've walked out of VR and been like, wow, the production value was so beautiful. Like, the sets were beautiful, the costumes, everything was so meticulous. You're really dropped into this world. It's all dance. It's non-linear, free associative, but like, it really presents a dance performance in a way that I've never experienced before, and there's a palpable sort of visceral feeling being so close to these dancers as you take the journey of their life together. I also really appreciated the fact that when I put it on, no one had to tell me how to engage with it or what the story was about. The story loops, and you can come into the story at any point, which is really interesting. Yeah, and so I really loved how it pulled me into the story world. Another one is again from Oculus Story Lab, and Satch Guttenzel also directed it. I think he co-directed it again, called Dear Angelica with Gina Davis, and it's an animated. They used their quill pen to do it, and again playing with scale, color, really being not just mentally immersed into a story, but physically brought into the story. Both those things together, I think, are really challenging, and they did them really well. So I highly recommend both of those.
Okay, that's super interesting, Peter.
I was going to say Notes on Blindness.
Yeah.
But you can say something more about Notes on Blindness. Because
Yeah,
it's
because,
already-
no, because it's such, as you said, also it's such, you can only do that in VR, and it's so powerful and so moving and
Which is
so
what it is.
beautiful.
It's a documentary about
Yeah.
a guy who's going blind with his actual audio tapes from that whole process.
Yeah, it's audio, like,
Diary, yeah.
Audio.
But what you see when you're in VR, there's a, especially towards the end, it's about like a visual representation of what it would be like to only hear. So the sounds are represented in the space, like you are in a church, for instance, and the echo, you can like sense the shape of the thing. It's very difficult to explain in words, which is exactly why it's great for me.
Yeah, it's really abstract. At the same time, it's kind of concrete, and you go through this story, and he describes it, but it's also very pure. It's very visually pure. You kind of.
It's a nice, actually a big great one if you're thinking about what is the difference between the medium, because there is a video of his story as well that the New York Times put out, but it's also very beautiful and stand on its own. But then to go and see the VR, you can see, okay, how can I tell a story on two different notes, and what does one medium offer that the other one doesn't? And I think abstraction is so key in VR.
Yeah.
It's funny, we call it virtual reality, but I think we need to lean a little bit more on the virtual, because whenever reality is it's designed quite well in our world around us, and it's hard to compete with it. And so often when you get into the VR space and it tries to be really real, the artifice is there, and it throws you out. So when you go into abstraction, you lean into that, it actually takes you deeper into a new world, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think because we are so good at, for example, recognizing faces, it's the best.
Yeah.
It is what we do as humans the best, and that's why when we see people are being recreated digitally, that it's not really right yet.
Yes.
Even though they spend so much money on it, but if you go in the abstraction level, you get a much more close, intimate reaction. Like watching Toy Story 3, and I cried when that ended because it's such a beautiful story, and that's little puppet, right? But when you see recreated humans, you get that unheimlich feeling, and I think that is one of the keys to really dive into virtual reality, is to go with the abstraction.
Right.
So a couple of you also actually mentioned animation pieces, and I think that's one part of the reason is that we can process like the emotions are very clear in animation, and you don't get that problem with realism at all. So animation is doing very well in VR right now, and it's sort of pushing the way. And at the very other end, we have maybe documentaries and non-fiction things. And then
Yeah, in live action role playing games, if we go back like 15 years, our goal was to create the perfect world, like go for realism. We call it the 360 aesthetic, and what we realized that it was actually an illusion, because when we went to that place where everything was perfect, that didn't make the story any better at all. Because then you notice the minute flaws that was in the room. And so like, okay, the answer is not there. I think for VR it's the same. The answer is not to create the perfect room. The answer is to create a compelling, interesting story, and you will connect with that, even though it's simplistic in its visual surface. Does that make sense?
That's why, just to build on that, I think that's what worked about through you. You know, when I'm talking about the production value, is it was live action video, but it really enforced that there was this artifice in a way. Like that the storyteller has created this world for me to enter, and that frees me, because then I don't have the responsibility of really judging whether it holds up to the outside world. So even those sort of tweaks are really helpful, I think, right now with VR. So
one solid piece of advice is like, if you just want to portray reality the way it is, you need to consider whether it wouldn't be easier just to take people somewhere and show it to them.
Yeah.
But that's why it gets frustrating when you make like a 360 documentary, right? Because all of a sudden you're in a labo. Fantastic. But you want to move, and then you can't. And then you get like, and then you get annoyed. and then all of a sudden you're kicked out of the experience because it isn't real because I can't move.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, when you manage to make it real, we will get annoyed if we can't do things that we used to do in the reality,
Right.
and that will kick us out of the experience.
So storytelling needs to connect to the limitations of the medium. So like one of your limitations with your piece was that the camera isn't going to move. So you figured out a way a reason in the story why the character wouldn't move.
Yeah.
And a lot of the good work operates exactly with this logic. At the same time, though, the technology, a lot of what is possible in VR is moving so fast.
Right.
The question is, will we be even able to figure out the good grammar for working with the current tools before all the next tools come in and the next tools and the next? I felt, Peter, that a very important detail about your story was that a technology company asked you to help them with content, and that is the majority of the funding currently comes from sort of organizations trying to sell you headsets, rather than
this was funded through the Film Institute.
Yes, the initiative of project, came from there. We have like 5 minutes left, and we could talk about this for several more hours, but basically each of you will have time to say like one thing. I've asked you to think of one conundrum that you would like to see, like one challenge in VR that isn't currently solved that you would like to see solved. But if you would rather say something else, that's also cool. But let's try and look forwards, like what's going to happen now? What's happening now in VR? What's happening next? Where are we going? What needs solving? Yeah.
I think the interesting part is solving multi-participant virtual reality. I think that's going to be absolutely mind-blowing and great. I think that's what I'm really looking forward to when that is solved. It's getting there. We'll see in 2 years' time.
On a very simple level, you may have seen, or if you haven't seen, you should look up the Facebook social VR demo. Putting several participants in the same virtual space is already solved. They don't look great, but that we're working on that. People are saying 2 years, and we'll have real-time multi-participant storytelling. And how do you write for that? They can say whatever they want. Can you even tell stories in that meeting? Can we, as filmmakers, tell stories in the meeting? That's not entirely certain. You need to be around or playwright, I don't know.
I will hope that soon we will kind of let the idea come first and let the technology follow the idea. And I know it's a bit general and a bit lame, but it's always that you really would like to experience something where you don't sense the technology, where you don't sense the thing that you have on reality, that you just kind of go with it. Like, I mean, we have had cinema for so long. Everybody has probably experienced sitting in the cinema theater and kind of disappeared for like 2 hours, and it was like amazing, and you don't know what happened. So, and you don't think that thinking about that there's a projector throwing light on the screen. So that would be nice too.
When will we see that?
What?
When will we experience that in VR?
In 2022.
Yeah, Katie?
I would love that too. I think I appreciate that so much when I walk out of a piece thinking about the questions that the creator is asking me rather than the technology they use to ask the questions. Right now, I'm really obsessed with how can we help guide the eye of the audience in a 360 space. So I've been researching what magicians can teach VR storytellers, because magicians are really great at taking a group of people into a space and getting us to look at really detailed things like a rabbit out of a hat or a deck of cards, and misdirecting our eyes towards pieces of information that they think will overwhelm us. So I'm excited about that. I've actually had a great conversation with Annika today about masks, and so sort of going from the opposite direction of social, I think we should lean into the fact that we are putting covers over our eyes, and maybe this medium is an opportunity to go really deep within ourselves. And we pay so much money a month to become mindful. Maybe this is really about going into our inner cells and digging deeper, and those are the stories. Isolation, deeper into isolation.
Going into the place where we cannot see our phone.
Yeah.
Annika.
No, particularly we were talking about that in terms of notice of blindness, and even the piece I talked about before about Patrick Watson, and said that these are very meditative experiences. So in one way, when we go into this mask, there's also space for us to rest, where it's quiet and nice. So that was one long story.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes for, I kind of wish that we stop our language of judging. People feel like we are never going to work, or I haven't seen a good piece, or the technology's out, and there's such busy negative speak instead of just saying, wow, how fun, let's play, let's see what we can do. And so I'm really wishing for me it's much more like curious collaboration without the pressure of having to deliver something that is perfect, but rather like let's just test and see what we can do, and for people to meet from different disciplines and start collaborating together and exploring and get that playground going without it's going to be so damn good all the time. And just stop that negative kind of, because there's all this discussion, well, the Pixel wasn't very good. I'm like, well, fuck that.
It's going to be, that's the thing.
Yeah, it will be. And for me, like, other people will take care of that, and other people will take care of the distribution and that stuff, but we need to meet, and I think it's like you said, like, with creative people and technologists and the creator of technology, we need to meet and play together and learn from each other on so many levels, but also with less pressure. I mean, it's fail fast forward thing, I was saying, this kind of.
So the same way that experimental film has played such an enormous, an art film has played such an enormous role for the development of cinema, also commercial cinema, we're in that space where we have to decide, I think, as societies, and if any of your funders keep this in mind, now is the time we get in, because now is the time we develop the grammar. I think if any of you are sitting here, I'm going to end on these words, if any of you are sitting here thinking, VR sounds like a fluke, might not happen, I remember when we were wearing 3D glasses in cinemas. This is not like that. This has already happened, this medium exists, the works are getting better at a terrifying pace. And all of the serious projections say that the global VR AR market is going to be something like $169 billion US. That is $169 billion US by, I think, 2022. So 5 years from now. So this is going to happen whether or not we take part in it, and whether or not storytellers like us work in this space. And I think it'll be better if we do work in this space. But I will ask for something.
But also one thing always leads to the next thing. I mean, I remember several years ago I sat with a TV commissioner that told me that interactive was never going to work, because media was never going to work, and his reason was like, look at the CD-ROM, that flopped. And I was sitting there like, oh my god, because each piece of technology that comes leads us to something new, because we are infinitely born as storytellers. We will always be in awe of the technology when it comes, and we're going to be, wow, how cool, and like these are very, very cool. But what are we doing with them? We're looking at stories. We're like spending this generation, I spent some time on Facebook looking at stories, we're creating stories. We'll always find a way to make stories out of the technology. So.
And that is where we have to end. However, I promise that all of us will be hovering outside a little bit so you can talk to us. Please give an enormous hand to Katie Newton, Annika Gustafsson, Peter Pontikis, and Bjarke. Thank you.